The Metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Supersocial, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Jan, and joining me today is Moritz Baier-Lentz, a venture investor with a focus on gaming. Moritz is a partner and the head of gaming at Lightspeed Venture Partners, a venture capital firm with over $18 billion in capital under management and more than 500 investments across the US, Europe, and Asia, including Epic Games, Stability AI, and Snap, among others. Previously, Moritz was a partner and management team member at BITKRAFT Ventures, where he led investments into Inworld AI, Theorycraft Games, Raid-Base, Lightforge Games, and Horizon Blockchain Games, among others. And actually, this is all pretty fresh. So Moritz just joined Lightspeed as a venture partner and a partner in the firm leading the gaming practice. And so I'm very excited to have you on the show today, Moritz.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into gaming, metaverse, and all of those different things, maybe let's start first and foremost with you're joining a pretty reputable venture fund, big with global exposure, been around for a long time. What is your mission as a partner and head of the gaming practice now at Lightspeed, joining into the firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that's worth pointing out is that gaming is not new to Lightspeed. It's actually been one of the generalist firms that's been most active in the space, notably since, I think, 2006, with early investments in Playdom and Kongregate. So most of the VC activity we see today in gaming is actually a large part comprised by funds that are relatively nascent, that are gaming specialist firms that emerged around 2018 or later. And so there are a few generalists that have over the years also taken a big leap forward into gaming, which stands, as many know today, as the largest media category and an important consumer foray that I think no VC firm should disregard, to the point that they're forming a separate practice. This is something new. This is something that we're building really in Q1 this year, and there's a lot more coming than the PR push we put out in January. There's a series of events planned. We're also launching a website and a sub-brand later this quarter, and are really putting our historical one foot in gaming on proper industrial rails with a dedicated team, an extended team, a dedicated founder support team, and a cadence to make sure that we don't miss any extraordinary founders building game studios, platforms, or tech companies.
That's really exciting. I think it's definitely been clear that over the past few years, gaming as a category is becoming much more mainstream and became an attention area for other generalist funds and other big funds that have launched kind of dedicated practices around gaming. I also think that we've seen probably over the last few years a lot of, tourist investors, people who suddenly like, oh, gaming, it's this thing that we should probably invest in. Let's jump in. And so, I'm curious to see who really stays into the realm and really incorporating gaming as a practice, because it's very different than consumer tech. It's not that trivial to figure gaming out. And as you said, Lightspeed has quite a track record for a generalist fund over the years. How does gaming, in the context of coming into Lightspeed and building this practice inside Lightspeed, how do you think about gaming? And as someone who is not only an investor, but also comes from the world of gaming, you've been a pro gamer yourself and a gamer for many years. How do you think about gaming in the context of the wider narrative of Metaverse? And maybe before you answer that, how do you think about the Metaverse as a category?
Yeah, so a bunch of loaded questions in there. So the way I like to think about it, and the way we've historically also done it at BITKRAFT, and I intend to continue to do it in the same way at Lightspeed, is to discuss deals, opportunities, and to construct hypotheses and analyze the value of an opportunity completely without using the term metaverse. You would actually, and that's maybe surprising, not see that word used at all when we discuss deals. And I think the main reason for that is that it's this, umbrella or this shell hovering over key underlying trends that are actually happening, and that can be very narrowly and very precisely pointed to on the content layer. Trends we're seeing there, obviously established founders building new game studios, but also things like user-generated content, generative AI, automatically producing content. We can point to platform shifts from traditional screens to XR, predominantly VR right now, going forward AR. We can point to information structure changes, most notably blockchain. And even below that, we can point to infrastructure changes, stronger CPU, GPU, networking advances, technologies that enable higher concurrency. So these are all things we can very clearly describe and forecast. What the metaverse is around that and what that evokes for different people, and you will even disagree with many people who have spent a lot of time in this space, whether today we already have a metaverse or multiple metaverses. If there's so much definitory ambiguity, it's almost not helpful to use the term. And so we frankly just disregard it and instead look at what's really happening. And I think there's just a lot of exciting stuff at the moment across content, across platforms, across information infrastructure, across the raw infrastructure layer that people lump into this broader phenomenon and want to give it a name, but it's not necessary for our work. And so likewise, if a founder uses the term metaverse in a pitch deck, it's fine. I don't have a negative reaction to it either, but it's basically disregarded in the context of everything else that is presented.
Super clear, and absolutely agree with the point of let's get into the substance of what is actually the underlying technologies or platforms or behaviors. I like to think about it from the human side. What people can actually do? What can they consume that is different? What can they build that is different? What can they monetize that is different, and so on and so forth. But I'm curious about, you threw out a lot of different trends and categories. What are the three most interesting categories under that umbrella that you are not only personally looking at with interest from an investor perspective, but also think that over the next 3 to 5 years, those are going to be the most dominant categories where we can really see a shift in what is being built and how it impacts people's lives?
Yeah, I love fantasizing about the future. I think we'll ultimately end up with AR devices on our heads that have a great form factor and hopefully a great price point, so it can be democratized. Maybe in our lifetime, we'll even have decently working brain-computer interfaces, invasive or non-invasive. That makes sense to me that we would see that. How much of this we will see over the next, call it 5 to 10 years, which is the lifetime of a fund for us making investments, at least in early stage companies, that's always a really tricky piece to get right. It's easy to see a lot of fantastic press that goes out on XR and Metaverse and think that it would be silly to miss this trend. But it's always, again, it's careful work as an investor to really focus on the fundamentals and basic, take an independent view on install basis and how that will develop over time. So while I'm very bullish on XR in general, and while I also think that Apple's devices to be released this year will probably do quite a bit to advance it even further into the mainstream, it's also very easy to forget that it's only about an active install base of 30 million units today, right? Contrast that against, I think, roughly 500 million PC, gaming PC users, console in a similar ballpark, 3.5 billion mobile gamers, I think. And then thinking that you can choose to fund a project that either caters to 30 million or 3.5 billion, it's obviously a very easy decision to make in isolation. They have different competitive scenarios. There's obviously a ton of mobile game developers. There's not many gifted studios. But in terms of what I think will be viable and interesting investment opportunities for us, one is just very much bread and butter, awesome game designers that have very experienced chops in building commercially successful games that we all love. And we've seen a bunch of that happen over the last few years. People who were instrumental in the creation of League of Legends, Call of Duty, Fortnite, Overwatch, Valorant, who left Riot Games, Blizzard, Epic Games, funded new studios, brought with them 70% of what they really learned well at these large publishers, have an let's say 20, 30% fresh take that makes sense for an audience that is evolving and contributing their own ideas, and maybe also leveraging technologies that didn't exist. Most notably at this point, probably, infusing the development pipeline with procedural generation and AI. So these are really just very established, very focused game studio builders that want to do it at their own terms. And that for us, there will be the main focus, if I have to name one. And it's not as crazy as a lot of stuff that we see in the media. The other focus for us is gaming platforms. We've just seen a lot of interesting use cases of platforms like Discord. I guess Roblox, you could call a platform of connecting players and developers, players and companies, or even companies and companies. Examples would be in-game advertising platforms. These have reached quite some scale too. If you look at the historical exits in venture capital, the ones that knocked it out of the park in terms of billion-dollar outcomes and fund returner outcomes for VC-backed startups, those have almost exclusively been game studios and gaming platforms. And then the last area that we invest in is what I call gaming-related technology. There's just a lot of interesting things that have been developed over the last decades. I mean, most notable, probably GPUs, originally for gaming, designed for complex 3D calculations, that became such powerful technological marvels simply because in interactive media, we oftentimes push the boundaries of what's technologically possible. And then that travels across media and sometimes even into other sectors to infuse them with similar benefits. GPUs now are the backbone for all blockchain, for all artificial intelligence. It's actually kind of crazy to believe or to remember that these were originally designed for video games. And so, these are not just hardware innovations that we're looking for. Predominantly, there'll be software innovations, but these horizontal technologies are very interesting too. And again, I think the one thing that's showing a lot of promise there is what we see built on top of stability AI, procedural generation, and I'm sure we'll even see completely different and arguably more impressive things even over the next couple of years in the lifetime of a fund. So it'd be a mistake, I think, to dismiss what's going on that front.
So I'm curious about your take on last year has been a year of enormous momentum for games built on blockchain, Web3 games, blockchain-based games. I know you've invested in a few in your time with BITKRAFT, and we started 2023 with an amazing momentum around generative AI. I personally see multiple startups popping up every week with, here's another company or software that allows you to turn text into game assets and so on and so forth. And there's going to be other use cases. How do you think about it as an investor on distinguishing between what is now hype? And, I think last year was, I would imagine, an interesting year in looking at the hype around blockchain-based games and where we are now. Not to say that this category is disappearing, but I don't see many people talking about it at the moment. And that's a category that gained, billions of dollars of investment last year. And maybe as a side note, kind of quote unquote, I was definitely wondering myself as an entrepreneur, how many blockchain-based multiplayer games should be founded in one single year on blockchain when the whole thing is not yet proven. And so how do you approach, given what happened last year or the past 18 months with blockchain-based games, how do you approach now a new category or a new trend like generative AI and the wave that this is going to drive with regards to generative AI X gaming equals a venture? How do you approach that to be wiser and smarter than maybe some choices that the wider VC landscape has made over the past 18 months when it comes to blockchain-based games?
Yeah, I'll start with my perspective on blockchain. And, we've had numerous discussions, not just over the course of the last couple of months, but really over the last 2 years, and with different perspectives. My take internally, and I've actually only invested in one blockchain game, and it's not because I don't like the idea of true digital identity assets and ownership. I mean, I used to be playing competitively during my teenage days. I was actually selling and buying characters and items quite extensively. So I can appreciate solving that, and also solving all the friction points that exist just functionally, apart from the philosophical benefits, if you want to call them such, for lack of a better word. The problem that I saw was not that it wasn't interesting to solve this problem. And I do believe that by and large, players cared about truly owning their identity online and their characters and their assets, and they still believe that. There were two main problems. One was a lot of the business models developed were straightforward predatory, but even the ones that were built in good intent were just really hard to get right from the get-go. And that's not new. We've seen that also in the transition to in-game monetization and microtransactions. Initially, a lot of those were for power-ups in multiplayer games, and you were creating pay-to-win dynamics. And we almost stumbled into this idea that people would actually pay extra money just for cosmetics to look cool in front of their friends. So I think that part can be solved. The other part that was arguably the even bigger problem from my perspective was that I think people were missing the point and looking to blockchain as a means of value creation when it was really rather a means of value distribution. And so what I mean with that is, if you build a game, you're creating a media format, and any media format, the value stems from the eyeballs it can attract and then retain. So if you don't have the team that has the game design chops to build a game that will last for a couple of years, a decade, that will be celebrated, that will draw audiences in over and over again, you don't have anything of value. This is completely independent from whether you use the blockchain or not. Blockchain can obviously also be value accretive, especially when you build community mechanisms and you use it in part for your UA function by incentivizing some of your fans to do your marketing for you. But in the end, the way I looked at every blockchain game studio, and the way I'm still looking at it, is it's a game studio. So let's talk about what games you've designed, what games you've shipped. Let's talk about why you think you can beat pretty formidable competition from big media and tech, and then also from a bunch of startups. And then let's talk about that again, and we'll spend a couple hours on that. And then we can maybe talk about if you use Amazon Web Services or whatever, how your backend looks like. And then after that, we can talk about whether you use blockchain or not. So it's kind of like topic number 7 or 8. Definitely doesn't need to be on the cover. And so there's a lot that went wrong on that front. And also, I think there's a lot of capital that was chasing, especially Web3 gaming, from people who actually didn't appreciate how hard it is and how important it is to build a good game. Now, I still think blockchain is a phenomenal opportunity, and we might still see it rise to the prime that well beyond the perceived prime from a year and a half ago. What's different, I think, already with generative AI is even just looking at the value you can get from the software that exists today. ChatGPT is the one that everyone passes around, and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion for image generation. There's no doubt that this stuff helps you be better, faster at a lot of things already. So there's no doubt around how value accretive it is. And then the question is only, if we manage to get here and looking at where it was 2-3 years ago, how much further can we really drive this arc before you have some asymptotical relationship? And where does this cap out? It's really hard to say right now, and it's almost somewhat scary to think about it. But as it stands, today, it writes better than most people I know. So everyone who doesn't write as good should use it to write better. There's no argument to be made that this is not good, useful stuff. So it's not even an opinion. I think it's a fact that this stuff is good. And so then the question is, can it be used for gaming? And does it add value to gaming, especially the development pipeline, but also the user experience? Yes, fact. You can create art faster, concept art faster. You can even create in-game assets, especially on mobile phones, not just 2D, also isometric. It can do already all that stuff. It can create richer environments already with NPCs that you can have very enjoyable conversations with for a long time that populate city environments. You can build in New York City now and throw in 10 million, 15 million New Yorkers that have their hopes, dreams, aspirations, beliefs, worries, agendas, motives. That's not possible to create by hand. We're not quite there yet, but we're very close. So does that have value? 100%. And the question is just who builds and captures it. But is it going to have a huge impact? There's no doubt. And so this is not a fad. Now the focus is more, as investors, trying to find the pockets of innovation that actually will create and harvest that value in the long run. Is it going to be the underlying technologies like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion? I mean, Lightspeed made an investment in Stability AI. Is it the things that build on top of that? Is it, after all, going to be Microsoft, maybe in combination with ChatGPT? Harder to say. I think it's more a discussion around value capture. The value creation part does not have a question mark.
There's an area that I am very excited about that is close to what we do at Super Social, that I'm curious about your point of view, and that is virtual worlds and the creation of virtual worlds. I've had Rev Laberidian, who is the VP Simulation and Omniverse at NVIDIA, on the podcast last year, and NVIDIA is pushing very hard on the creation of technologies that anyone, using universal scene description and technologies that have been built by Pixar, that ideally anyone in the future can build and ship anything in 3D, in real-time 3D. And obviously that's something that companies like Roblox is dreaming about enabling, and Unity is dreaming about enabling, and Epic has the whole Epic ecosystem that is obviously not yet tightly integrated in enabling something like that, but they have big dreams with Fortnite Creative and integrating the Unreal editor into Fortnite Creative to enable more complex experiences to be built. We've seen platforms like Core raising $100 million, yet to be proven. We've seen Rec Room that have been growing gradually, but still a relatively small player in the ecosystem. We've seen Yahaha that have raised for a low code, no code, right? And so there's a lot going on in the world building creation in real-time 3D. What are the things that you believe are going to need to be true to enable companies, new ventures, to actually be able to, quote unquote, compete and have a key or an instrumental role in an ecosystem that is dominated by companies that are not necessarily massive, but companies that have been around anywhere between 15 to 30 years, right? Roblox, Unity, Epic. These are all veteran companies. They may not be considered big tech, but they've been around for a long time. And it took a long time to build those ecosystems. How do you think new ventures can actually compete, or what is the type of innovation that you imagine companies like that bringing to the table to have a chance to play a key role in that bigger, wider ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually seen a lot of good, I would say, technological innovation or logical innovation, including from some of the startups that you've mentioned. And, those are also, I would say, those are early or mid-stage startups in comparison to the Roblox and Unreal Engines of the world. You mentioned Manticore and Yahaha and others. Soba is also one that Lightspeed invested in. I think it's really tricky to push even a superior platform and technology without also having a really compelling content experience that draws people in and helps with this player to creator loop. We've seen, including with a couple of names that you mentioned, this chicken and egg problem of actually having something really cool, but it being really empty. There's a few startups that are approaching it in a way of building a really compelling game and a really compelling platform in conjunction. And we'll see if that could be a better wedge.
Because one of the things that, obviously we were, as a side note, Super Social is fully focused on the Roblox platform. And I talk to a lot of people on a lot of platforms that, hey, what about this platform? And what about that platform? And one of the key lessons learned that we drew on why Roblox became Roblox, and it's such a comprehensive player in the ecosystem, is the strength and the stickiness of the developer ecosystem. You're right, creating content that resonates with people. Ultimately, people come to a platform because of the content, right? So Apple is the largest, most prestige ecosystem of applications for mobile, because that's what people buy. And even if it's not the largest, because Android ecosystem is bigger in terms of market size, but not necessarily in market value. And it's because people are obsessively attracted to the content that is being produced for iPhone, for tablets, et cetera, et cetera. And I see that with Roblox as well. And so when we have conversations about other platforms, I always remind people how difficult it is to build a thriving, dedicated, excited developer ecosystem that can really generate continuously quality A+ content that will resonate with the audience. And in the Roblox case, it's a younger audience. In the Fortnite creative, it's a certain type of audience, right? I think it's 90% of Fortnite users are 18 to 25-year-old male users. And Minecraft has a certain cluster of users that resonate with those particularly. That to me is a big challenge. And a question I have for you is, as you look at these new emerging technologies, anywhere from immersive tech like VR, AR, or even talking about generative AI or the wider consumer AI revolution that is happening, to what extent do you believe that those technologies can amplify paradigm shifts that would make building competing platforms faster, better, ultimately in a way that will attract users and consumers?
I think one really interesting trend that's also happening on the, by and large, loop it into the UGC trend, is how much easier it is getting to create 3D assets and compelling 3D, even landscapes, or game, the visual component of the game-like experience or game platform experience. This is independent from just putting together existing assets and tying some game logic on top of them, which is a lot what the existing UGC platforms do. But if you just look at the user-generated content more broadly, take gaming aside for a second, we moved from text, which was the early internet, and then kind of social media was image sharing and image creation, and now obviously with TikTok that has moved to video. But this next stage to 3D and interactive is quite a big one, and it gets really complicated there. But you have technologies like Nerf, for example, coming out of NVIDIA, and older fields like volumetric video, photogrammetry, that help you to actually capture 3D, capture reality as you see it, and transport that into an interactive 3D world, to the extent where I think in a couple of years, this is not a wild fever dream, but this is just like maybe 2 years out or so. If you want to build a platformer game, including your cat, you take out your phone, you hold it around the cat, and the cat's moving in the meantime. You kind of capture it from all sides. You have the visuals, you have the motion, and then that just gets directly transported into Unity or Unreal. And so it has everything ready to go for it to be plugged into whatever world you were building. And it sounds so silly to leverage reality for complex 3D stuff, but we leverage reality for most photorealistic content. If I see a nice sunset outside, I'm not going to open up Photoshop and start drawing on a blank canvas. I just use my phone, I take a picture. And so why don't we do it in 3D? It's just not there quite yet, but it's very logical to me that ultimately would also happen. And then sharing will, as it has moved from photos, the Instagram age, to video, the TikTok age, it will be maybe initially interactive memories, interactive three-dimensional videos, to possibly also game-like experiences. The logic part is really hard. Right? To build a good game, you need a sexy core loop. To really build a valuable, great game, you need to enchant audiences for years.
Do you believe that at some point in the future, and no need to make a prediction of time, but do you believe that at some point in the future, we will be able to create completely artificially generated gameplay experiences with the loop, with the whole thing that is fully autonomously created just by either writing a piece of text or some way of informing the machine what type of game you want to create? And it will not only create something, which will probably be one great accomplishment of technology, but actually creating something that will be pleasing for consumers? Do you see a future like that?
Yeah, I think it's actually relatively easy to see that future. And that's the crazy part also about ChatGPT. You can give it coding instructions. And I've seen some videos that don't get quite to what you describe, but they get pretty close. And usually when you get pretty close, it means that in 10 years, it's wildly better and, beyond what you even conceive today. Versus, for example, I see that on traditional screens happen even before we all run around with affordable, super slim AR glasses, because there you're really running against physics. With what you just described, you're just running against logic. And in some pockets of logic and generative AI, we're already scarily close.
That's fascinating. To think about the implications of fully...
Yeah, I've seen this video where someone was describing a visual scene just by text, and this is not an image that was created, but it was an interactive 2D environment where different weather effects were generated. So the AI was writing code to simulate raindrops, flashes, and all that kind of stuff. And it looked pretty good. So this part's already possible. I'm pretty sure even today, if you stretch the technology that's out there today, I think you could already do in a poor way what you just described as a wild future, even with what we have today.
Maybe I have a pet project for the weekend. We'll think about that. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about something that I don't know if you have a kind of a strong point of view on, but I'm curious about your opinion. One of the things that we've seen on the Roblox platform, for example, for the past year, which also plays an important role in how we're building up the business, is the adoption of virtual worlds and game worlds by brands. And I'm not talking about brands in the context of someone who has a entertainment IP, like a TV show, that wants to translate that into a game. I think that's been happening for a long time. I'm talking about consumer brands, retail brands. I'm talking about beauty brands, fashion brands. And we launched one of the most successful brand experiences last year on Roblox with a cosmetics brand. A few years ago, if you would have told me, or I would have come to you and say, Moritz, in 2022, we're going to see brands building their own video games, you would probably tell me, Jan, you're absolutely ridiculous. This is a ridiculous idea. They're not even doing simple things of integrating into gaming as it is today, traditional gaming, mobile. And if it is, it's not fully bespoke branded games. So we're seeing that growing adoption, and TBD if that's going to stay and if it has longevity and if it's a business case that brands would want to continue and evolve with. On Roblox or beyond, it doesn't really matter what the platform. I think the modality is what's important. Having a branded virtual world that is a gateway to not only interacting with communities and establishing relationships, but also monetizing and creating a business asset, which ultimately, beyond the marketing buzz, that is what is important for a business, to create business assets that generates profit. Do you have a perspective? I'm curious about what are you seeing that is interesting, that gives you confidence that this behavior and trend will continue, or the opposite?
Yeah, first one point you made that I also have an interesting addendum to, which is the cross media of gaming and film. It is worth pointing out that historically it was film becoming games, and now there's many instances of games actually creating pop culture and IP and moving into film. The Witcher, The Last of Us, there are I think they're right now on Netflix. There are 15 or 20 games in production for adaptation.
Incredible. I didn't know this number.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think there's roughly 25, 30 games overall that are being adapted in some form of film by one of the larger streaming giants, and the overwhelming majority is on Netflix now. Will that all result in something that people will actually enjoy? We'll see. Different budgets behind it, but that has never happened before at this scale. And I think it links to your actual question, because games are just where people are spending their time, and an increasing proportion of the population is spending its time. We're probably the first generation that grew up with the internet available in our formative years. So there's still a little bit of pre-internet adolescence in us. And for anyone who grows up after us, this is just becoming the norm. And there's this huge generational tailwind of it just being completely normal to spend a lot of your time and to meet your friends and to shape your shopping behavior, and to even this you could call a virtual world here, like to collaborate, to work, to socialize in virtual environments. And I think it's very natural that a lot of traditional activities are moving into these worlds. By and large, that's just digitization of user behavior. So shopping moving first from retail to online, and then to more compelling environments. Because in the end, if gaming is where the eyeballs are, if gaming is where people spend their time, then I think everyone should think about how can you get a share of those eyeballs? And brands need to think, how can I be in games if games are where consumer eyeballs are? If it's no longer linear TV, if it's no longer on-demand media, even if it's no longer the box office, if it's no longer music, then that's where the advertising needs to shift too. So this is totally logical to me. The other cool thing about games is also it's the richest format. It is social, it is interactive. You can actually put all other media categories into games. You can have films and music into games, but good luck, putting a game into a song. So it's a central hub that can suck in all kind of media formats and all kind of online activities. I just really don't see it go soon, but you have these massive generational tailwinds, and then you have the massive technological tailwinds too that allow you to do more, better, faster, cooler, in novel ways as well.
I think the one I'm with you, and I think gaming is here to stay as a wider public phenomena beyond kids playing games or core gamers playing games, and not in a way like casual games on mobile. I am talking more about virtual worlds where you have these communities that you're part of. The one thing, though, that I'm not sure about, and I'm always playing my own devil's advocate, because I think of virtual worlds as beyond the context of gaming. I think of virtual worlds as we've evolved from desktops to mobile phones. And then we have virtual worlds that are more 3D spaces that I think historically have been for kids and gamers, right? I still remember building my first company in 2012 and seeing the explosion of Minecraft in 2011, 2012. Roblox started to pick up in 2015. Fortnite arrived 2017, 18, right? And now these are kind of the big three that people are typically mentioning when you think about virtual worlds or game environments. And it's clear that anyone below 25 years of age around the world, this is what they know. There's a whole generation now, a couple of billion people around the world, that all they knew for the majority of their time between age 6 to 18 has been Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, or a combination of all three. Of course, you have other stuff, right? GTA, League of Legends, World of Warcraft, right? There's all of those, quote unquote, less open, less UGC, more classic, or the legacy game, big games, 3D games that people loved. I think what's really unique in my mind about this more refined generation of virtual worlds like Roblox, Minecraft, etc., is that these are really the first example of social spaces where people accidentally play games. And that's what leads me to the point that I'm curious about your perspective as an investor, but also someone who's just been living in the gaming scene for a long time. Is there a world, and what does it look like if virtual worlds go beyond quote unquote gaming? And if yes, what does that look like in a way that can really touch the hearts and the minds and the attention and the pocket of everyone, not just people who want to play games?
Yeah, I mean, isn't Zoom that?
In a 2D format, pretty much.
Yeah, it's interactive, it's virtual. Probably make it 3D with some little tweaks.
They even integrated recently a few different applications that you can activate. But it's funny you're mentioning it, because last year I had on the podcast Tim O'Reilly, Web 2.0 OG. And the first question I asked him, so Tim, what is the metaverse for you? And he was like, well, I think we are in the metaverse now. On Zoom, we're interacting. And he said something interesting. He said, for him, it's a point of time where people connect together in real time, digitally, live. And I thought that's a really thought-provoking thing that really removes all the burden of thinking about 3D world and expansiveness, 3D avatar. Do you subscribe to that worldview?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of many definitions, right? Does the metaverse, let's maybe go through the checklist that everyone has in their mind. Does the metaverse need to be a game? I would say no. Does the metaverse need to be massively social? Yes. Does it always need to be on and always need to be there, kind of like the internet? I would say yes to. Persistent, yes. Does it need to be experienced through XR devices, AR, VR? I would say no, and that's probably the most controversial one. And when you look at metaverse posters, it's usually someone with unbranded portable fridge on top of their forehead and then with eyes and mouth wide open.
Even Time Magazine just released the new edition for Davos.
The Davos with Klaus Schwab and everyone.
Yes.
Well, you're part of that initiative.
I am, and you are
right?
too.
And so 2 papers that came out today as part of everyone gathering in Davos, where metaverse is the topic of the week, and multiple work streams actually on side of the World Economic Forum to contribute on a global agenda on topics like building equitable and fair social virtual worlds and standardization for interoperability, etc. So going back to that list, I think, is XR necessary for the metaverse? I would actually say no, and most people would probably default to yes, at least the way it's depicted most commonly. Is blockchain necessary for the metaverse? Absolutely also no, I think. That's maybe also a controversial take, because people think that this needs to be a world that's completely decentralized. And at least it's not historically how humans have organized themselves. And so I think the jury is out on that. It doesn't mean that decentralization and blockchain will not find good use cases, but we may very well end up with a metaverse that is a lot more centralized. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's bad. I think those are the things that people have in their head. Like, another popular definition of the metaverse is also it's the point in time, not the point in time where you socialize with people in a digital format synchronously, but it's the point in time where your digital identity and assets matter more to you than their physical counterparts. That's also an interesting definition, because I would say some people are there today and many people are not. And I would say I'm not there today. I cherish what I have in the physical world. But I would say I was there 20 years ago in the depth of playing Diablo 2, where all I could think about was not what happened at school, or, I hate to admit it, with friends and family at some points in time, but what was happening on screen and what was happening digitally, and what could I accomplish, and what is this item worth. And my account got hacked one day. It wasn't even hacked. I basically fell victim to a very simple and very early password scam. I was 12 or 13 at the time, so pardon my ignorance. And I remember this day profoundly. I remember the whole week and how much pain it caused me to lose all that stuff. And I was trying to describe to my parents and my brother what had happened and the severity of it. And all they could tell me was just that they hadn't immensely good time about it. We still talk about this sometime because everyone remembers this week. It had such gravity. So here's another way of thinking about the metaverse. I think we've cycled through a few dimensions and definitions.
I think you touched upon all the important components. I would just say, and I'm a big believer in that, because I don't get excited about thinking about the future of the internet in a way that is dystopian, where everything happens virtually exclusively. And to be honest, it doesn't matter if you access it through a VR or XR or from a 2D screen on a Mac or an iPhone. To me, no one is really wrong about their definitions. That's the thing. Like, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. I think what's really important in my mind is that when we think about our identity virtually, I really encourage people to make sure that it's not disconnected from our physical identity. Because as you said, we cherish that. And I believe truly, and I'm talking also as a father of an 18-month-old baby girl who is probably the first metaverse native generation, who is going to be fully immersed in everything 3D, fully virtual, fully connected. I mean, kids are already that, but I think it's going to be 10x more intense in the next 10 years. I want to make sure, and I hope that my 18-month-old daughter is not going to only live virtually, but her identity virtually and her identity, quote unquote, IRL, should be connected. It shouldn't be this dystopian world where it's separate and it's about escapism. I think escapism is a very dangerous thing for humanity. And I hope that we're going to build worlds and technologies and platforms and games and experiences that are going to bring those things together versus coming to a point of time where we care more about our virtual identity. I think we should care equally about that as we do about our IRL identity, and care about it the most in a holistic manner. It reminds me, I'm sure you may have read the book, The Singularity is Near, by Ray Kurzweil, right? And he says that there's going to be a point of time for our audience who maybe doesn't know the term or read the book. In the future, I think there is even a year where he believes it's going to happen, 2050 or maybe before. There's going to be a point of time where artificial intelligence will be smarter than human intelligence, or more capable than human intelligence. And that is a very scary thing to think about. But I also think that it's pretty scary to think that whatever it is that our virtual identity becomes, we will care more about that than about our actual real life identity. I don't want to help create that type of reality.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that point. This was the big kind of agenda for Niantic over the course of last year, to promote what they labeled the real world metaverse, and promote a vision of digital worlds that are actually overlaid on the physical world in tandem with the physical surroundings. You mentioned a few things that are quite important to not lose track of, so to speak. I think it's very easy, though, to demonize escapism and virtual reality and dismiss it as that in the position that we're in, which is also, I would say, a position of much privilege, to live in a world that is actually pretty awesome by and large. And that's not the case for everyone, right? And there are a lot of people in the world, in emerging markets, but also in the United States, where escapism actually sounds pretty good. And I think that's the dangerous part about it, and that's of societal importance to get that right too. That's also why I think the work that outside of corporations, stuff like what the World Economic Forum is doing, and when governments are looking into these topics, these are crucial initiatives and really difficult to get right. And it's very easy to go down a path that's possibly very destructive. But yeah, I mean, it's also easy to dismiss VR when it can actually have quite an important role to play too. Like, I invested in a company called Trip on behalf of BITKRAFT. That's a VR meditation app. This is an experience that actually lends itself very nicely to escapism. Meditation is introspective. Meditation is usually shielded from the world around you, typically by closing your eyes. In this case, you can create very conducive visuals that help with calming sensations and experiences that have real physical benefits to the users. And it's also, interestingly, a first-person experience meditation. For those who meditate, that might resonate. And their VR checks a lot of the boxes, and it's actually pretty great for that. The company is also developing AR meditation. But yeah, so escapism is also not necessarily problematic. But yeah, everything in moderation and a lot of tricky things to get right, not just technologically, but also societally.
That's a great note to wrap up the episode. Moritz, thank you so much for joining. Congratulations again on joining Lightspeed as a partner and building the gaming practice. And yeah, let's just keep building.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the Metaverse.